It was a busy Tuesday morning at the Hamilton County Courthouse. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Sarah Jenkins rushed through the metal detectors, nearly dropping her worn leather bag. She was running late, something that rarely happened in her usually well-organized life. The courthouse hallway was packed with people, their voices echoing off the marble walls. Sarah checked her phone one last time before entering courtroom 304. Her simple outfit, faded jeans, a navy sweater, and scuffed sneakers, stood out among the suits and formal attire around her. She hadn't had time to change after her early morning community center visit. Inside the courtroom, Judge William Harrison sat high on his bench, his silver hair and black robes giving him an imposing presence. At 62 years old, he had spent the last 20 years building a reputation as one of the strictest judges in traffic court. His thin-rimmed glasses rested low on his nose as he reviewed each case with unwavering sternness. Case number 247, Sarah Jenkins, parking violation, the court clerk announced, her voice monotone from repeating similar phrases all morning. Sarah walked forward, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished floor. A few people in the gallery looked up briefly before returning to their phones. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the room, making everyone look tired and washed out. Ms. Jenkins, Judge Harrison began, looking down at her over his glasses. You were parked in a loading zone for over 2 hours on March 15th. The fine is $150. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Sarah stepped closer to the podium. Yes, Your Honor. I was unloading supplies at the East Side Community Center. We were delivering. The sign clearly states 15-minute parking only. Judge Harrison interrupted, his voice sharp. He noticed her casual attire and made an immediate assumption about yet another person trying to avoid responsibility. If you needed more time, you should have made multiple trips or found legal parking. Sir, if I could explain. Sarah tried again, maintaining her composure despite the judge's dismissive tone. Ms. Jenkins, the court's time is valuable. The sign was clear, and you chose to ignore it. Judge Harrison's voice carried years of dealing with excuses. Given your previous parking violation from last year, I'm doubling the fine to $300. A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. The court clerk glanced up from her computer, her fingers pausing over the keyboard. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably near the door. Sarah stood straighter, her brown eyes meeting the judge's stern gaze. Your Honor, I understand the violation, but the circumstances. The circumstances, Ms. Jenkins, are that you broke the law. Judge Harrison's words cut through the air. Perhaps a larger fine will help you remember to follow parking regulations in the future. $500, due within 30 days. The silence in the courtroom grew heavier. Sarah's hands gripped the podium tightly, her knuckles turning slightly pale. She had faced prejudice before, but something about this moment, about being dismissed so completely without a chance to explain, struck deeper. In her pocket, her phone buzzed silently. Probably another message about the upcoming board meeting or the new software launch. But here, in this courtroom, none of that mattered. Here, she was just another person being judged by her appearance. Yes, Your Honor. Sarah replied quietly, her voice steady despite the frustration building inside her. She reached into her bag and pulled out her checkbook, the same one she used to sign million-dollar contracts. Judge Harrison was already looking down at the next case file, dismissing her presence entirely. Next case, he called out, as Sarah wrote the check with practiced precision. As she walked out of the courtroom, Sarah passed a young law student who had been taking notes throughout the proceedings. The student looked up, recognition flickering across her face as she glanced between her phone and Sarah. But Sarah was already pushing through the heavy wooden doors, stepping back into the bustling hallway. Outside, the spring sun was bright, a stark contrast to the artificial lighting of the courtroom. Sarah checked her phone, 3 missed calls from her CEO assistant, 2 texts about the afternoon's investor meeting, and an email about her upcoming Forbes interview. She smiled slightly, tucking the phone away. Judge William Harrison had no idea who he'd just fined, but he, and everyone else, would soon find out. Sometimes the best lessons about prejudice came from unexpected places, and Sarah Jenkins was about to become an unexpected teacher. Judge William Harrison sat in his chambers later that afternoon, loosening his black robes as he leaned back in his leather chair. The morning's cases played through his mind while he sipped his 3rd cup of coffee. After 20 years on the bench, most days blurred together, but something about the last few hours left him unsettled. His clerk, Lisa Martinez, knocked softly before entering with another stack of files. She'd been working with him for 5 years and had learned to read his moods well. Today, she noticed the deep frown lines around his mouth were more pronounced than usual. "Busy morning in court, Your Honor," Lisa commented carefully, organizing the files on his desk. She hesitated before adding, "That parking violation case seemed a bit harsh." Judge Harrison looked up sharply. "The law is the law, Ms. Martinez. We can't make exceptions just because someone gives us a sob story about community service." Lisa nodded politely, but her thoughts drifted to the young woman in the simple sweater. Something about her composure had been different from the usual defendants. "Of course, Your Honor," though she did try to explain. 20 years on this bench has taught me one thing," Harrison interrupted, standing up to peer out his second-floor window at the courthouse parking lot below. "Everyone has an excuse. Give them an inch, they'll take a mile." Outside, expensive cars mixed with beat-up sedans in the crowded lot. Harrison's own Mercedes sat in its reserved spot, a symbol of his successful career. He worked hard to get where he was, son of a factory worker, put himself through law school, earned his position through dedication and strict adherence to the rules. His phone buzzed on the desk. It was a message from his daughter, Rachel, a second-year law student. "Dad, are you watching the news? There's something you need to see." Harrison ignored the message. Rachel was always sending him articles about judicial reform and implicit bias. Last week, she tried to convince him to attend a diversity training seminar. He declined, citing his years of experience as education enough. "Your afternoon schedule includes 3 traffic court sessions and a meeting with the Judicial Review Board," Lisa reminded him, changing the subject. She'd learned when to push and when to step back. Harrison nodded, returning to his desk. As he reached for the next case file, his computer chimed with an email notification. Then another, and another. "Ms. Martinez," he called out as his clerk reached the door. "Is there something wrong with the courthouse email system today? I'm getting an unusual number of messages." Lisa pulled out her phone, quickly scanning local news sites. Her eyes widened slightly. "Sir, you might want to check social media." "You know, I don't bother with that nonsense," Harrison replied dismissively. In his view, social media had only made his job harder, with everyone thinking they knew more about the law than he did. The phone on his desk rang, the direct line from the Chief Judge's office. Harrison's stomach tightened slightly as he answered. "Harrison speaking." "Bill." Chief Judge Thompson's voice was tense. "We need to talk about your morning session, specifically about Sarah Jenkins." "The parking violation?" Harrison felt a flicker of annoyance. "Simple case, clear violation. I don't see." "She's the CEO of TechBridge Solutions," Thompson cut in. "The company that just received $50 million in venture capital funding. She was delivering educational supplies when she got that ticket." The coffee cup in Harrison's hand froze halfway to his mouth. He remembered the young woman's attempted explanation, her calm demeanor despite his dismissal. His mind raced back through the interaction, seeing it now through a different lens. "There's video," Thompson continued, his voice growing more concerned. "Someone in the courtroom recorded it. It's already trending on Twitter. The headlines aren't good, Bill." Harrison sat heavily in his chair, his robe suddenly feeling too tight around his neck. Lisa quietly placed a printout on his desk. A Forbes magazine article from last month, featuring Sarah Jenkins on the cover. The same woman he'd dismissed without a second thought stood confidently in a business suit, described as revolutionizing educational technology for underprivileged communities. "Bill, are you still there?" Thompson's voice seemed distant now. "Yes," Harrison replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I'm here." Outside his chamber windows, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across his parking spot, where his Mercedes suddenly seemed less like a symbol of success and more like a reminder of how far removed he'd become from the people he served. Sarah Jenkins pulled her Tesla into the private parking spot at TechBridge Solutions headquarters, the same car she deliberately hadn't driven to court that morning. The modern glass building stretched 15 stories into the sky, its windows reflecting the afternoon sunlight. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since she left the courthouse. "Ms. Jenkins." Her assistant, Marcus, rushed to meet her as she stepped out of the elevator onto the top floor. The video is everywhere. CNN wants an interview. Forbes is calling for a follow-up piece, and the mayor's office left 3 messages. Sarah walked through the open plan office, where her 100-plus employees tried to look busy plus stealing glances at her. The $500 fine she paid that morning was less than what she spent on coffee for the office each week, but that wasn't the point. "How many views?" she asked, entering her corner office with its view of the city skyline. The East Side Community Center, where she'd been delivering laptops when she got the ticket, was visible in the distance. Marcus checked his tablet. The courthouse video hit 2 million on Twitter in the last hour. "People are pretty angry about how the judge treated you." Sarah sat down at her desk, where a framed magazine cover showed her standing in front of a classroom of smiling students. 5 years ago, she'd been a teacher in that same community center, watching brilliant kids struggle because they didn't have access to proper technology. That's what sparked the idea for TechBridge. "Cancel my afternoon meetings," she said, logging into her computer. "But keep the video conference with the school board. Those kids need their computers." Her office door opened again as Dr. Patricia Wong, her chief technology officer, walked in. "The new educational software launch is trending too. People are sharing your story alongside screenshots of our program. We've gotten 3,000 new signups in the last 2 hours." Sarah smiled slightly. Their AI-powered educational software was designed to adapt to each student's learning style, making quality education accessible to everyone. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same day a judge assumed she was just another rule breaker, her company was helping thousands of students break free from societal assumptions about their potential. "Ms. Jenkins," Marcus interrupted, "your mother's on line 1. Sarah picked up the phone, already knowing what her mother would say. Marie Jenkins had raised her alone, working 2 jobs to put Sarah through college. She taught her daughter to hold her head high, no matter how others tried to put her down. "Baby, I saw the video." Her mother's voice was calm but concerned. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom," Sarah replied, looking at the latest quarterly reports on her screen. $12 million in revenue, partnerships with 50 school districts, and a waiting list of investors. "Actually, I think this might be a good thing." "What do you mean?" Sarah opened her email and began typing. "Remember what you always told me? Sometimes the best way to change minds is to show them what they refuse to see." Her mother chuckled. "And what exactly are you planning to show them?" "The truth," Sarah said, finishing her email. "Marcus, send a press release. We're announcing a new initiative, an AI program to help identify and reduce bias in the judicial system. Free access for any court willing to implement it." The office went quiet. Dr. Wong raised her eyebrows. "That's not in our current development pipeline." "It is now," Sarah replied, standing up to look out her window. From 15 stories up, she could see the courthouse where Judge Harrison was probably just learning who she was. "We'll call it Project Justice Bridge." Her phone buzzed again, another news outlet wanting a statement. But Sarah was already thinking ahead. The judge's dismissive attitude wasn't unique. It was part of a larger system that needed changing. And if there was one thing Sarah Jenkins knew how to do, it was using technology to bridge gaps. "Marcus, set up a press conference for tomorrow morning," she said, turning back to her team. "And find out which community centers in Judge Harrison's district need computer labs. Let's send them our latest educational package, the complete set." As her team rushed to work, Sarah's mother was still on the phone. "You're going to turn this into something good, aren't you?" Sarah watched a group of students entering the community center in the distance. "Mom, I'm going to turn it into something necessary." The media storm hit faster than anyone expected. By the next morning, every major news outlet had picked up the story. Alex Chen, a tech blogger who had been in court for his own speeding ticket, sat in his small apartment, watching his article go viral. His hands shook slightly as he refreshed his website's traffic statistics. Over 100,000 views in just 12 hours. Local judge finds tech CEO. A story of bias in the courts. Read his headline. The article included both the courtroom video and links to Sarah Jenkins' impressive business achievements. Every major news channel was now running their own version of the story. "This is Channel 7 News, reporting live from outside the Hamilton County Courthouse." A reporter spoke into her microphone, her red blazer bright against the gray building behind her. "Yesterday, Judge William Harrison fined TechBridge Solutions CEO Sarah Jenkins $500 for a parking violation while she was delivering educational supplies to underprivileged children. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. Court officers whispered in corners while lawyers checked their phones between cases. Judge Harrison's courtroom sat empty. His morning sessions had been reassigned to other judges. The chief judge's secretary hurried through the hallway, carrying printouts of news articles. The Washington Post had just published a deep dive into Judge Harrison's record, revealing a pattern of harsher sentences for certain defendants. Social media was filled with similar stories from past defendants. Meanwhile, at TechBridge Solutions, Sarah stood before a forest of microphones in the company's main conference room. Camera lights flashed as she addressed the packed room of reporters. "This isn't about a parking ticket or a fine," she said, her voice steady and clear. "This is about the assumptions we make about people based on their appearance. Today, I'm announcing Project Justice Bridge, a new initiative to develop AI technology that will help identify patterns of bias in our judicial system." The reporter's hands shot up, questions flying from all directions. Sarah pointed to a woman in the front row. "Ms. Jenkins, will you be filing a complaint against Judge Harrison?" Sarah shook her head. "This isn't about punishing one judge. It's about fixing a broken system. We're offering our technology free of charge to any court system willing to implement it." In his home, Judge Harrison watched the press conference on his TV, still in his bathrobe. His phone had been ringing nonstop since yesterday. His daughter Rachel sat beside him, her law textbooks forgotten on the coffee table. "Dad," Rachel said softly, "she's handling this with more grace than most people would." Harrison nodded silently, remembering how quickly he dismissed Sarah Jenkins. The Forbes magazine still lay open on his coffee table, her successful face staring up at him. Back at the press conference, Sarah was explaining the technology. "Our AI system will analyze court decisions, identifying patterns that might indicate unconscious bias. It's similar to the educational software we developed, but focused on ensuring equal justice." Social media exploded with reactions. #JusticeBridge and #CourtroomBias became trending topics. Other tech companies began pledging support for the initiative. Civil rights organizations called for wider implementation of bias detection systems in courts nationwide. Alex Chen, the blogger who started it all, posted a follow-up article, "How a Parking Ticket Sparked a Justice Revolution." His hands were steadier now as he typed about Sarah Jenkins' response to discrimination, not with anger, but with innovation. By afternoon, the story had reached international news. BBC World News interviewed Sarah via video call, highlighting how technology could help address systemic bias globally. "Ms. Jenkins, what do you hope will come from all this?" the BBC reporter asked. Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "I hope that someday, when someone walks into a courtroom, they'll be judged by the truth of their actions, not by assumptions about who they appear to be." In his chambers, Chief Judge Thompson watched the interview on his computer. On his desk lay 2 documents: Judge Harrison's request for a leave of absence and a formal application from the court system to pilot Project Justice Bridge. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered with signs reading "Justice should be blind" and "Technology for change." News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal trees. The story had become more than just a viral moment. It was turning into a movement. And at the center of it all, Sarah Jenkins continued doing what she'd always done, using technology to bridge the gaps in society, one system at a time. Judge William Harrison sat alone in his study at home, surrounded by law books and memories from his 20 years on the bench. The morning newspaper lay untouched on his desk. He couldn't bear to read another article about himself. His phone buzzed again, probably another reporter, but he ignored it. Through his window, he could see news vans still parked at the end of his driveway. They'd been there for 3 days now, hoping to catch a statement from the biased judge, as social media had labeled him. The blinds in his house had stayed closed all week. "Dad." Rachel's voice came from the doorway. His daughter had been staying with him since the story broke, worried about how he was handling the situation. She carried 2 cups of coffee, placing one on his desk. "You need to eat something. You've been in here all morning." Harrison picked up the coffee but didn't drink it. On his computer screen, a video played silently, security footage from his courtroom over the past year. He'd been watching his own cases for hours, seeing his behavior through new eyes. I keep thinking about all of them, Rachel, he said quietly. How many others did I judge unfairly? How many lives did I affect because I thought I knew better? Rachel sat down across from him, her law books tucked under her arm. She'd been trying to talk to him about bias in the legal system for years. Now, finally, he was ready to listen. Look at this. Harrison clicked through several cases on his screen. Last month, 2 people with the same violation. I fined one $200 and the other $500. The only real difference was, his voice trailed off. Their appearance, Rachel finished gently. Dad, recognizing it is the first step to changing it. In his inbox, an email from the chief judge waited for his response. The court was planning to implement Sarah Jenkins' Justice Bridge program, and they wanted Harrison to be part of the pilot team. The irony wasn't lost on him. His doorbell rang, making both of them jump. Through the security camera feed, Harrison saw Sarah Jenkins herself standing on his porch, alone except for one assistant. No cameras, no reporters. Should I let her in? Rachel asked, already moving toward the door. Harrison straightened his tie. He still dressed formally each day, a habit of decades. Yes, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's time I faced this. Sarah Jenkins entered his study with the same quiet confidence she'd shown in his courtroom. She wore a simple business suit now, but Harrison noticed she carried the same worn leather bag from court that day. Judge Harrison, she said, extending her hand. I thought it was time we had a real conversation. Harrison stood, taking her hand firmly. Ms. Jenkins, I owe you more than an apology. Actually, Sarah said, placing her bag on a chair, I think you owe something to every person who ever stood in your courtroom feeling prejudged. That's why I'm here. She pulled out a laptop, opening it to reveal the Justice Bridge program interface. This system isn't about punishment, Judge Harrison. It's about awareness and change. Would you like to see how it works? For the next hour, Sarah showed him how the AI program analyzed court decisions, identifying patterns that humans might miss. Harrison watched, asking questions, seeing his own biases laid bare in the data. The program isn't perfect, Sarah explained, but neither are we. That's the point. We all have biases, but technology can help us see them more clearly. Rachel sat quietly in the corner, watching her father lean forward with genuine interest, taking notes just like he had in law school decades ago. Outside, the news vans began to leave, unaware of the real story happening inside. Ms. Jenkins, Harrison said finally, looking up from his notes, I'd like to do more than just apologize. I want to help implement this program. Use my experience, my mistakes, to show other judges why it's necessary. Sarah smiled, the same smile that Grace magazine covers and inspired tech investors. Judge Harrison, that's exactly why I came here today. Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who've learned the hardest lessons. Through the window, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Harrison's law books, their spines bearing the words justice and equality in faded gold letters. Today, those words were taking on new meaning. 1 week later, the Hamilton County Courthouse's largest courtroom was packed with people. Reporters filled the back rows, their cameras ready. Judge William Harrison stood at the podium where defendants usually stood, his black robes replaced by a dark blue suit. His hands gripped the wooden rail tightly. I've spent 20 years behind that bench, Harrison began, pointing to his usual seat. I thought I was serving justice, but I wasn't seeing the whole picture. The microphones carried his voice clearly through the hushed room. Sarah Jenkins sat in the front row, her presence making this more than just another public apology. Beside her sat community leaders, other judges, and Rachel, who watched her father with proud tears in her eyes. Last week, I fined Ms. Sarah Jenkins without giving her a fair chance to explain herself. Harrison continued, his voice growing stronger. I made assumptions based on her appearance. I was wrong, but this isn't just about one mistake. The chief judge leaned forward in his chair, watching closely. This wasn't the standard written apology his office had prepared. Harrison had insisted on speaking from his heart. For 20 years, I probably made the same mistake countless times, looking at people and deciding their story before they could tell it. Harrison paused, making eye contact with Sarah. Ms. Jenkins could have used this incident to demand my resignation. Instead, she showed me a better way forward. Sarah nodded slightly, encouraging him to continue. Behind her, Marcus, her assistant, was live streaming the speech to TechBridge Solutions employees and supporters worldwide. Today, I'm announcing that I'll be taking a temporary leave from the bench, Harrison said, causing whispers to ripple through the crowd. During this time, I'll be working with TechBridge Solutions to help develop and implement their Justice Bridge program. Cameras flashed as Sarah stood up, walking to join Harrison at the podium. They had rehearsed this part carefully. Judge Harrison will serve as our judicial consultant, Sarah explained to the gathered crowd. His experience, and yes, his mistakes, will help us create better technology to prevent bias in our courts. The reporter's hand shot up, but Harrison wasn't finished. I'm also enrolling in a comprehensive bias training program, and I'm requesting that it become mandatory for all judges in our district. He turned to face his fellow judges in the audience. We can't serve justice if we're not willing to face our own prejudices. Rachel wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her father. This was the change she'd been hoping for since her first year of law school. In the audience, Lisa Martinez, Harrison's clerk, smiled proudly at her boss's transformation. The Justice Bridge program will be implemented in phases, Sarah continued, pulling up the presentation on the courtroom's large screen. Phase 1 begins next month, analyzing historical case data to identify patterns of bias. Harrison stepped forward again. I'm asking my colleagues to join me in this initiative. Not because we're bad judges, but because we can be better ones. His voice cracked slightly. Every person who walks into this courthouse deserves to be seen for who they really are, not who we assume them to be. The chief judge stood up, leading a round of applause that echoed through the marble halls. Reporters rushed forward, questions flying from all directions, but Harrison raised his hand for silence. One more thing, he said, turning to Sarah. Ms. Jenkins, I believe I owe you a refund on that parking ticket. He pulled an envelope from his pocket, but Sarah shook her head. Keep it, she said, her voice carrying through the microphones. Put it towards computers for the courthouse's new bias training program. Outside the courthouse, the spring sun shone brightly on the gathered crowd. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing the moment when Judge Harrison and Sarah Jenkins walked out together, a symbol of how conflict could lead to change. Ready for this? Sarah asked quietly as they faced the media crowd. Harrison looked at his daughter in the crowd, then at all the faces watching them, some skeptical, some hopeful, all waiting to see what would happen next. Ready, he replied. It's time to bridge the gap between who we are and who we should be. 3 months after the courthouse apology, Sarah Jenkins stood in TechBridge Solutions' newest office space, a converted floor of the Hamilton County Courthouse. Computer screens lined the walls, displaying real-time data from the Justice Bridge pilot program. Judge Harrison sat at one of the workstations, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed case statistics. Look at this pattern, Harrison called out, pointing to his screen. Sarah walked over, her heels clicking on the polished floor. We've identified a 40% difference in fine amounts for the same traffic violations based on zip codes alone. The room buzzed with activity as programmers and legal experts worked side by side. Rachel Harrison, now officially part of the Justice Bridge legal team, led a training session in the corner. Her father often paused his work to watch her with pride. Ms. Jenkins. Marcus rushed in, waving his tablet. The governor's office just called. They want to implement Justice Bridge across all state courts, and 3 other states are requesting proposals. Sarah smiled, remembering the parking ticket that started it all. The fine receipt still hung framed in her office, next to her Forbes cover. Send them the data from our first quarter, she said. Judge Harrison, would you join me for those presentations? Harrison nodded, then turned back to his screen with a frown. Sarah, look at these numbers from Judge Peterson's court. The racial disparity in sentencing is even worse than what we found in mine. That's why we're here, Sarah replied, pulling up a chair. Together, they began analyzing the data, their unlikely partnership now feeling natural. Harrison had surprised everyone with his dedication to the program, often working late into the night reviewing cases. In another corner, Dr. Wong's technical team was upgrading the AI algorithms. The system just flagged a potential bias pattern in juvenile cases, she announced. It's identifying judges who assign harsher sentences to kids from single-parent homes. The courthouse halls outside had changed too. New signs pointed to the Technology and Justice Center, and young tech workers with laptops mixed with lawyers in suits. The building felt more alive, more connected to the community it served. Sarah's phone buzzed, a message from her mother. "Baby, just saw you on the morning news again. They're calling Justice Bridge a revolution in the legal system. Your father would have been so proud." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes as she typed back. Her father had died when she was young, unable to afford proper medical care. Fighting systemic inequality had been her driving force ever since. "Everyone, gather round," Sarah called out to the room. The teams paused their work, forming a circle. "I just got word that the Supreme Court Justice is coming next week to see our program. They're considering implementing it at the federal level." A cheer went up from the group. Harrison stood up, straightening his tie. He traded his judicial robes for business suits but kept his formal habits. "Should we show them the new feature we're developing?" Sarah nodded, pulling up the latest project on the main screen. It was a real-time feedback system that would alert judges to potential bias before they made decisions. The interface was simple enough for any judge to use but sophisticated enough to detect subtle patterns of prejudice. "Remember," Harrison addressed the team, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "we're not just writing code or analyzing data, we're changing how justice works in this country." Rachel joined them at the front, legal documents in hand. "The Bar Association wants us to develop a training program for law students too. They're saying this could change how we teach law." Outside the window, they could see the community center where Sarah had been delivering laptops that fateful day. It now had a fully equipped computer lab, donated by TechBridge Solutions. Every week, Judge Harrison volunteered there, teaching kids about the legal system and listening to their stories. 6 months ago, Sarah said to the room, "I stood in court feeling powerless because someone judged me without knowing me." She gestured to their surroundings, the computers, the teams, the future they were building. "Now we're making sure that story doesn't repeat itself." Harrison placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're not just building bridges," he said, looking at the diverse team around them. "We're building a new path to justice." 1 year after the parking ticket incident, the Hamilton County Courthouse buzzed with excitement. Banners reading National Justice Bridge Conference hum in the marble hallway. Judges, tech experts, and legal professionals from all 50 states filled the main courtroom, now converted into a conference hall. Sarah Jenkins stood at the podium where she'd once been fined, but today she wore a confident smile along with her elegant business suit. Behind her, a large screen displayed the Justice Bridge program's nationwide impact. Over 200 courts adopted, 50% reduction in biased decisions, 1 million cases analyzed. 1 year ago, I stood in this very spot, being judged by appearances, Sarah began, her voice carrying through the packed room. Today, I stand here with proof that technology and compassion can transform our justice system. In the front row, Judge Harrison sat next to his daughter Rachel, both now key figures in the Justice Bridge movement. Harrison's hair had more gray now, but his eyes showed a new kind of wisdom. He'd spent the past year traveling to courts across the country, sharing his story and helping implement the program. "Our latest data shows that courts using Justice Bridge have significantly reduced disparities in sentencing," Sarah continued, switching to the next slide. "But numbers only tell part of the story. The real change is in the lives touched." The screen changed to show video testimonials. A young mother spoke about receiving fair treatment in a custody case. A teenager described how a judge had given him a second chance after understanding his circumstances. Each story reflected the program's human impact. From her seat in the audience, Sarah's mother wiped away tears. Next to her sat Lisa Martinez, Harrison's former clerk, now the program's chief training coordinator. The courthouse staff had evolved with the times, proving that change was possible at every level. "And now," Sarah said, smiling broadly, "I'd like to introduce someone who has become both a partner and a friend. Judge William Harrison." Harrison walked to the podium amid thunderous applause. His transformation from a symbol of bias to a champion of change had made national headlines. "A year ago, I thought I knew what justice looked like," he began. "I was wrong. Justice isn't about what we think we see. It's about what we take the time to understand." In the back of the room, tech bloggers live-streamed the event. Alex Chen, whose original article had helped spark the movement, typed furiously on his laptop. His latest headline would read, "From viral moment to national movement, Justice Bridges' first year." Sarah returned to the podium, standing beside Harrison. "Today, we're announcing the next phase of Justice Bridge. Through a partnership with major law schools, we're introducing bias detection training for all future judges and lawyers." Rachel stood up, joining them with a thick folder. "The Supreme Court has just approved our program as a mandatory requirement for all federal courts," she announced. "And the American Bar Association is incorporating our training into their ethics requirements." The crowd erupted in applause again. In the audience, the chief judge who had witnessed it all from the beginning nodded in satisfaction. His courthouse had become ground zero for a national transformation in justice. "But our work isn't finished," Sarah continued, her voice growing passionate. "Every day, people walk into courtrooms across this country, hoping to be seen for who they really are. Our technology can help, but the real change comes from people willing to look past their first assumptions." Harrison stepped forward one last time. "A year ago, I fined this remarkable woman because I couldn't see past my own biases. Today, I thank her for helping me, and all of us, see justice in a new light." As the conference continued, Sarah slipped away to the quiet of her old office in the courthouse's tech center. On her desk sat two framed items, the original parking ticket and a recent letter from a young girl who wrote, "Because of Justice Bridge, the judge listened to my story." Through her window, she could see new faces entering the courthouse, people of all backgrounds, each carrying their own stories. But now, thanks to one parking ticket and the changes it inspired, they had a better chance of being heard. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Harrison. "Ready for tomorrow's training session with the new judges?" "Ready," she typed back, smiling. "There are always more bridges to build."